Good morning. I'm Kipp, he, him, and I am very glad to be here preaching in the sanctuary. It's been a while. I have to learn how to read off of notes again. Our first reading this morning is actually going to be easy. I don't have to read anything. We are celebrating Epiphany today, which is a day in the church calendar when we tell the story of Magi, of wise ones coming from the east. So I thought today I would share a video from 2 years ago when our resident Magi came from the east. Kyoko came from Japan on a tourist visa a couple of years ago, bearing gifts. She sent this video of a gift that happened spontaneously in the Los Angeles airport.
The first one note to the left.
Right there.
Yeah,
No?
yeah, try it. Exactly, right.
Now we got the first part done.
You got the first part. That's a start. That's Beethoven. Go ahead. Got it. Perfect. Sounds good. Perfect, you got it. Yay!
She takes the teacher wherever she goes, making music with TSA agents on a public piano in the Los Angeles airport. Who knew? So this is the story that is assigned for Epiphany. It comes from Matthew's Gospel, second chapter. It says, in the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem, asking, "Where's the child who has been born ruler of the Jews? For we have observed his star at its rising, and we've come to pay him homage." When King Herod heard this, he was frightened, and all of Jerusalem with him. It's frightening when the king is frightened. And calling together all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. They told him, "In Bethlehem of Judea, for this is what was written by the prophet, and you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for from you shall come a ruler who is to shepherd my people Israel." Then Herod secretly called for the Magi and learned from them the exact time when the star had appeared. Then he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, "Go and search diligently for this child. When you've found him, bring me word so that I also may go and pay him homage." When they had heard the king, they set out, and there ahead of them went the star that they had seen at its rising until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw that the star had stopped, they were overwhelmed with joy. On entering the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they knelt down and paid him homage. Then, opening their treasure chests, they offered him gifts of gold and frankincense and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they left for their own country by another road. This is God's good news. In 2000, the year 2000, do you remember that? It seems so quaint, all of these fears of computer systems crashing and all that. In 2000, Kathy and I were living in our first home, which was a 12-foot wide row house in West Kensington, part of the housing stock that had been built so that workers would be nearby the factories that they were laboring in the 1930s. We bought it from an old church lady who was moving to Seattle to live with her daughter, paid $20,000 for our first house. It was tiny, but it worked for us. When the weather was bad, I would go down into the basement, which is where our TV was, so I could exercise in front of the television. We were never really sure how we had cable TV, because we've never paid a cable bill in our lives. So it was either that it had never been turned off when the little old church lady left for Seattle, or she had somehow been stealing it. You know, church ladies can be tricky sometimes. Either way, it allowed me to watch the Phillies and also to have music videos playing on those wet, nasty days when I still wanted to exercise. One of those music videos was of a skinny young white guy walking along the beach singing a song in his delicate, fragile falsetto as he sort of melded with sand and sun and surf. It was the first time I'd ever heard of Coldplay, and this young guy was singing, "Look at the stars, look how they shine for you, and all the things you do, yeah, they were all yellow." And I have no idea what it means. Everything is colored yellow. Maybe it's just an emotion, or maybe it's a love song of sorts, bursting happy feelings, but it's a song about a star, or stars, so maybe it's an epiphany tune, right? That's where we are in the church calendar. Epiphany. Technically, the day of Epiphany was this past Thursday, and today is the baptism of Jesus. They jump like that in the calendar, but we're going to talk about Epiphany a little bit. We celebrate it as a season often in church. It starts with the story that was our Bible reading, a story of magi coming to visit a baby. The story is often told as three kings, but that's a tradition that developed outside of the text, of what the story actually says. It's an assumption because the story has three gifts, and those gifts are wildly valuable, so somewhere along the line, someone thought, oh, okay, these must be three kings. And that's how Bible translators started to deal with the word magi. But the story itself doesn't number them, nor does it gender them. They are just magi, wise ones, astrologers following a star that they have discerned a message in. Make there be as many of them as you want and gender them however you would like. The point of the story is the journey and the gifts. If we read the story literally, or even if we don't read it literally, it's kind of absurd. Matthew's gospel doesn't give us the elaborate setup that Luke does. There's no room in the inn and the manger and the angel chorus and the shepherds running all over the place. Matthew starts his story with a genealogy and then jumps straight into a pregnancy and birth. This is the story of Jesus, says Matthew. Mary and Joseph were engaged when Mary turned up pregnant, not by Joseph. Joseph was going to call things off, but he had a dream that convinced him not to. So Jesus was born. And then Magi came with gifts of gold and frankincense and myrrh. We might ask what in the world this young family is going to do with these incredibly impractical gifts. I mean, maybe it's a nice nest egg for a young family, but mostly I'd bet that the gift they wanted more than anything else was a good night's sleep. But it's a symbolic story. Those gifts are there to make a point about the worth of this child, maybe every child, and of this unorthodox family. These gifts say that this family, this child, is more important than Herod, or more worthy than Caesar. They also do some difficult foreshadowing because frankincense and myrrh were used for burials. Threatening the power structure comes at a cost. The symbolism of the story is intense. It has also prompted some really deep reflections. Christian churches have let this story guide them into powerful engagements with other Christians and with people of other faith traditions. It's a story of magi crossing boundaries, coming from the east, using their own system of wisdom and discernment to cross those borders in search of deep truth, bringing gifts that may seem impractical to us, but that the larger story definitely has a use for. It's a reminder that we don't have a monopoly on what it is to be human, to search for truth, to encounter the sacred, that the boundaries between the sacred and the profane, the boundaries of spirit, are more porous than we allow for and let on sometimes. I know I've told this story of attending this church for my very first time in the summer of 2000, just weeks after I'd left my first congregation. I remember it was a communion Sunday, but mostly I remember that because everything else felt so strange. This congregation didn't have a good culture of welcoming visitors, so Kathy and I sat through the entire service without anybody saying a word to us. I think I told this story last February when we celebrated Linda's 20th anniversary. How she asked my name when we were standing in the communion circle, and then when I dipped my bread into the cup, she tilted toward me. Later, she greeted me by name at the door as we left. I don't remember what the music was like that communion Sunday as we stood in the circle waiting for the elements and holding hands with people we'd never met before. It must not have seemed too out of the ordinary in contrast to everything else that just seemed so odd and scrambled my brain that day. But I remember something about the second time I was here for communion, which would have been the following month. Kathy was still coming to church with me at that point. And we both stood in the circle waiting for the bread and the cup to come around so we could do our rip and dip. And then we held hands with each other and again with strangers, people unrelated to us, in that fragile, beautiful, awkward moment after everyone has had the elements. And one of the pastors said, "Is there someone who could send us off in a prayer?" Before someone's voice stumbled into a tentative and tender benediction of the moment, those piano chords sounded awfully familiar. And Kathy and I lifted our gaze from the prayer just a little, made side-eye contact with each other, and bit our lips a little bit to stop from laughing out loud and breaking into song because it's true. Look how they shine for you. Look how they shine for you. And Kyoko was playing Yellow. Coldplay in communion, in church, the playful beauty of it. She was playing Coldplay, and whatever the song means, the communion circle had just all turned yellow like the Epiphany star. I've been here a long time now, first as someone who was just active in the congregation and now someone on the pastoral staff. Even if you take out those 2 stints where I served as an interim pastor somewhere else, and when you discount the weirdness of the past 2 pandemic years, I've heard at least a decade of Kyoko's communions. I wish I could remember even a sliver of the sacramental soundtracks that have filled this space. There's Coldplay. Some of the usual sacred music suspects make it into the mix. Contemporary classical. There's been some Disney music. I'm pretty sure I've heard some John Coltrane, some Charles Mingus, Art Blakey's Moanin'. The theme song from The Mission, which is one of the most heartbreaking movies I've ever seen. But oh, that song. We might even just think back as long ago as this morning's gathering music. There were Bach, Chopin, and Debussy. There was also Enya There's also gospel music, This Little Light of Mine. If we think back a little farther to Christmas Eve, Kyoko headed up our worship band of Lynn Riley, Steve Strawitz, John Guest. Hi, John, it's good to see you on Zoom. He's in the bottom right for folks. Dan Radici. I think it was Dan's suggestion to play a piece called Pick Up the Pieces by Average White Band, but the band's version that night was inspired by the Phil Collins big band. It was a mighty and righteous funk that they played for the Christmas Eve offering. Kyoko said to me after worship that evening, it feels a little bit like the pandemic has left so much in pieces. Tonight was a night to pick them up. We had to pick them up. I hope it was okay that we played that. Of course it was okay. It was more than okay. It was Christmas Eve, and Pick Up the Pieces was every bit as sacred as the impromptu dance party that broke out on the stage, and maybe in some of your homes during Feliz Navidad at the end of things. What wouldn't be sacred about joy in our bones and wiggles in our hips? It was every bit as sacred as, say, the hesitant approximation of Moonlight Sonata played as a duet by two TSA agents in Los Angeles who just received their first piano lesson ever on a public piano. Which is to say that all places are holy, all musics are holy, all bodies are holy. That is one of the things that you have brought to us, Kyoko, in your more than 25 years here. I looked in the files. 1996 is what I found. I was just graduating college then. That dates me surprisingly young for some of you, surprisingly old for others of you. It's just a number. Your standards of excellence, your attention to mood and to season and occasion, your playfulness, your sense that music itself is gift and sacrament, that any given song might be a fistful of gold or frankincense or myrrh, and while we might wonder what practical use a baby has for any of that, the point is to just bring what gift you have and trust that Spirit can make use of it. Your ministry here is a reminder to all of us of what it means to show up to church. Show up and bring what you've got. There's room for it here. And so our Magi, our musically wise one, as you prepare to head back to the east, you have been adamant that this is not a goodbye. Your visa fell through the cracks that were widened by a racist administration, and there's not been an easy fix to it just yet, but your attorney is still hard at work. And one of the gifts of the pandemic is that we are finding new ways to be expanded community all over the place. You have been, again, adamant that this is not goodbye, because you will join us on Zoom if you can't join us in person. That is, it is not goodbye because you take seriously what we say every time we have a baptism and every time new members join the church, that you belong to us, that we belong to you, that along with the entire universe, we all belong to God. So this is not goodbye, but it is safe travels. It is fare thee well. It is thank you. It is we love you. And maybe some nights back at home when you've had a dinner and a good conversation with your mom, and you walk outside and look up into that dark Osaka sky to see all those yellow stars shining down, and you'll know yourself bathed in the same light that bathes us. See how they shine for you. This is God's good news.